There was a quiet morning when everything finally fell apart. Not in a loud way, not with shouting, or doors slamming, or storms breaking the sky. It happened quietly. The way a candle slowly goes out when no one is watching. He sat alone, staring at what used to be his life. The things he once held with pride were no longer there. The plans he believed in had faded like old footprints in the sand. Strangely, the world around him kept moving as if nothing had happened. The wind still moved through the trees. Birds still crossed the sky without hesitation. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed. But inside his chest, there was only a long, heavy silence. Have you ever felt that kind of silence? The kind that arrives when something important disappears and you realize there is no way to bring it back. He did not cry at first. Not because he was strong, and not because he did not feel the pain. Sometimes the heart becomes so full that tears cannot even find their way out. He simply sat there, letting the quiet settle around him. Memories passed through his mind like slow-moving clouds. Moments when everything seemed certain. Moments when hope felt simple and easy. Back then, he believed the future was something solid, something you could hold with both hands. But life has a strange way of reminding us how fragile our plans really are. Little by little, things had slipped away. A door closed here, an opportunity vanished there. A misunderstanding grew where trust once lived. At first, he tried to fix everything. He tried to explain himself. He tried to hold together what was slowly breaking apart. But explanations often fall on ears that have already decided what they want to believe. And so the more he spoke, the less they seemed to hear. Eventually, something inside him grew tired. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. The kind of tiredness that comes when you realize you are fighting a battle that cannot be won with words. So he stopped. He stopped trying to defend every misunderstanding. He stopped chasing every lost thing. And when he stopped, a strange quiet entered his life. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable, almost frightening. Without the noise of explanations and arguments, he could finally hear his own thoughts clearly, and what he heard surprised him. Beneath the disappointment, beneath the sadness, there was still something alive. A small, steady flame. Hope. Not the loud kind that shouts about victory. Not the kind that demands the world return what it has taken. This hope was quieter, gentler. It simply remained even after everything else had fallen away. He began to notice this slowly. While they whispered their stories about him, he said very little. While they looked at his losses and believed his life was finished, he quietly observed something different. He noticed that although much had disappeared, he himself was still here, breathing, thinking, watching. The world had taken many things from him, but it had not taken his ability to remain calm in the middle of the storm. It had not taken his dignity, and it had not taken that quiet hope sitting patiently inside his heart. Sometimes the greatest losses reveal something we never realized we possessed. Something stronger than possessions, stronger than reputation, stronger even than the opinions of others. He did not fully understand it yet. He only felt it like a faint light somewhere in the distance. And so he sat there in that quiet moment where everything seemed broken. Not rushing, not fighting, not explaining, just breathing and listening to the silence. Because deep within that silence, something was beginning. Something they could not see. Something they would never understand. After that quiet morning, something subtle began to change. Not in the world around him. The world continued exactly as it always had. Voices still moved from place to place. Eyes still watched. Judgments still formed in quiet corners. But inside him, something had slowed down. He noticed how quickly people created stories when silence appeared. They watched him carefully now. They studied the calm in his face as if it were something suspicious. Why is he so quiet? Why does he not explain himself? What is he hiding? The questions did not come to him directly. They moved around him like wind through tall grass. He could feel them passing, even when no one spoke them aloud. And slowly, the whispers began. Not loud whispers, just quiet assumptions, spoken between people who believed they understood what had happened. They said he had lost his way. They said his silence meant defeat. Some believed his quietness was shame. Others believed it was weakness. He heard these things. Of course, silence does not make a man deaf. But he no longer rushed to correct them. Once, he might have tried to explain everything. He might have gathered his words carefully, hoping that if he spoke clearly enough, they would finally understand. But something inside him had already learned a quiet lesson. Understanding cannot be forced into a closed mind. So he listened and remained still. At first, this felt unnatural. There is a deep human urge to defend ourselves. When we are misunderstood, the heart quickly searches for the right words, the perfect explanation, the sentence that will make everything clear. But the strange truth is, explanations rarely travel as far as rumors. Rumors move quickly because they ask for nothing. They simply drift from one person to another, growing a little larger each time. Truth, however, asks for patience. It asks people to pause, to listen, to consider something carefully. And not everyone wishes to do that. So he allowed the whispers to pass like clouds. He did not chase them. He did not argue with them. He simply watched them come and go. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, he wondered about this. Was his silence being mistaken for surrender? Perhaps. Was his calm making them believe he had nothing left to say? Maybe. But another question slowly appeared in his mind. Did it truly matter? For many years, he had lived with the feeling that every misunderstanding must be corrected. Every judgment must be answered. Every accusation must be pushed away. But now he was beginning to see something different. The more he tried to shape how others saw him, the more trapped he became inside their opinions. It was like trying to hold water in his hands. The tighter he held it, the faster it slipped away. So he loosened his grip. He let their thoughts belong to them. He let their stories move where they wished. And in doing so, he discovered a quiet space that had never existed before. A space where he did not need to perform. A space where he did not need to prove anything. Just quiet, just breath, just observation. From that quiet place, he began to see people more clearly. He noticed how easily fear becomes judgment, how quickly confusion becomes criticism. Often, those who spoke the most about him seemed to know the least about his heart, and yet they sounded so certain. This realization did not make him angry. If anything, it made him gentler, because he began to understand that people often speak from their own hidden worries, their own uncertainties, their own need to believe they understand the world. So he did something simple. He allowed them to believe what they wished, not because their words were true, and not because he agreed with them, but because his peace no longer depended on their understanding. And slowly, the silence around him became different. It was no longer the silence of loss. It was the silence of restraint. The silence of a man who had discovered that not every voice deserves an answer. And in that quiet restraint, something new was quietly growing. A strength that made no noise. A strength that did not argue. A strength they could not see, and therefore could not take away. And perhaps something that could never be taken away. Time passed quietly, the way seasons change without asking for attention. The whispers did not disappear. They still moved through the air now, and then, carried by voices that believed they understood his story. Some continued to watch him carefully, waiting for signs of anger or collapse or regret. But those signs never came. From the outside, his calm looked simple. Too simple, perhaps. To many people, silence always looks empty. When a man does not react, they often assume he has nothing left inside. They saw his quiet steps. They saw the way he spoke less and listened more. They saw the way he allowed conversations to pass without defending himself. And so they drew their own conclusion. He had been broken. Life had defeated him. This, they believed, was the face of someone who had lost. But what they could not see was the slow rebuilding happening beneath that calm surface. Because silence, when it is chosen with awareness, becomes something very different. It becomes a place where a man can hear himself again. For a long time, his life had been filled with noise, expectations, opinions, the constant movement of trying to meet the world's demands. When all of that disappeared, the quiet at first felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. But slowly, he began to understand its gift. In the stillness, he could observe his own thoughts with honesty. He could ask himself questions that once felt too heavy to face. What had truly been lost, and what had only been an illusion of security. He began to see that many of the things he once believed were permanent had never truly belonged to him. Circumstances change. Positions shift. People move closer and then farther away. The world rearranges itself again and again, often without warning. But beneath all those changing things, something deeper remained. Character, dignity, the quiet ability to stand without bitterness. These things had never left him. They had only been hidden beneath the noise of everything else. So while they believed his silence meant weakness, he was discovering something stronger than reaction. He was discovering restraint. Restraint is not loud. It does not seek recognition, but it requires a certain strength that few people notice. It is easy to shout when you feel wronged. It is easy to argue when you feel misunderstood. The voice rises naturally when the heart feels attacked, but to remain calm. When every instinct invites you to defend yourself, that requires something deeper. He began to notice this in small moments. A passing remark meant to provoke him, a glance filled with quiet judgment. A conversation where his story was spoken as if he were not even present. Once, these things might have stirred something restless inside him. But now, he simply observed them, not with coldness, just with a quiet understanding. He realized that reactions often feed the very fire they are meant to extinguish. When anger meets anger, the noise grows louder. When arguments collide, truth often becomes harder to see. But when silence meets judgment, something unexpected happens. The noise begins to fade on its own. Without resistance, the storm loses its strength. And slowly, those who expected him to fight began to feel something unfamiliar. Confusion. Why does he not react? Why does he not defend himself? The questions remained unanswered, because the truth he had discovered was not meant for explanation. It was something to be lived quietly. Day by day, he carried himself with the same calm presence, not pretending, not hiding pain, simply choosing dignity over reaction. And though they could not see it, something inside him was growing steadier with each passing moment. The strength they once believed he had lost was still there. In fact, it had become clearer than ever before. It was not the strength of control, or reputation, or outward success. It was the strength of a man who no longer needed the world to agree with him in order to remain at peace. A strength that lived quietly, far beneath the surface. A strength that did not argue, and perhaps for that very reason, a strength they could never truly understand. In time, the world grew quieter around him. Not because the voices had disappeared completely. People still spoke as they always had. Opinions still traveled from one place to another, carried by certainty and assumption. But their words no longer reached the same place inside him. There was a time when every judgment felt heavy, when every misunderstanding created a small storm in his heart. Now those storms passed far away, like distant thunder that never quite reached the ground beneath his feet. Something inside him had settled. It was not indifference. His heart had not turned cold. If anything, he felt the world more gently than before. But he had learned where his peace truly lived. It did not live in the approval of others. It did not live in reputation, or praise, or the fragile comfort of being understood by everyone. Those things move like shadows. They appear and then disappear again. For many years, he had believed hope was something that depended on circumstances. If life moved in the right direction, hope would grow. If things were lost, hope would fade. But now he could see something he had never noticed before. Hope had never belonged to the outside world. It had always lived quietly inside him. Even on that day when everything seemed to fall apart, it had not left. It had only become quieter, waiting for him to notice it again. He remembered that morning sometimes. The stillness, the feeling that his life had collapsed into silence. Back then, he thought the silence meant emptiness. But now he understood something very different. The silence had simply cleared away the noise. Without all the voices, without the endless effort to prove himself, he could finally hear the quiet strength that had always been there. It had been patient while he chased things that could disappear, patient while he tried to control how others saw him, patient while he fought battles that never truly belonged to him. And when those struggles finally faded, the quiet strength remained. Hope did not shout to be heard. It did not demand recognition. It simply stayed, like a small flame that continues to burn even when the room grows dark. He carried that flame with him now, not proudly, not as a lesson to teach others, just quietly as part of who he had become. They still watched him sometimes, though less often now. The whispers had grown softer over time, replaced by the ordinary concerns of their own lives. The stories they once told about him slowly lost their importance, and he allowed them to fade without correction, because he had learned something simple. Not every story needs to be rewritten. Some stories simply lose their power when you stop arguing with them. So he walked forward with a calm step. The world around him remained unpredictable, as it always had been. Things would still change. New losses might come. New misunderstandings might appear. But those possibilities no longer frightened him. He had already discovered something the world could not easily take away. The quiet knowledge that peace does not arrive when life becomes perfect. Peace arrives when a person no longer fights every passing shadow. And so his life continued in a quieter way, not empty, not defeated, just steady. The man who had once believed he lost everything slowly understood the truth. What he lost were only the things that could be taken. What remained was something deeper, something silent, something patient, and something that had never left him, even in his darkest moment. Hope, not loud, not demanding, just quietly alive within him, exactly where it had always been.